And welcome back. It's now 13 minutes away from 7 o'clock, and as promised before the break, we're sitting down with Senator Mark Lizarraga to talk about the Petro-Carib funds and a myriad of issues related to it. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Marlene. Good morning, William. Welcome back from your
the cold. Thank you very much. Let's jump directly into this because I think there's a frame that needs to be set. In 2005, when we had the Finance and Audit Reform, the Act first, there was an outpouring of people talking about, and it went to court actually, to actually look at it and to say that, listen, we need to hold governments accountable. And so that act was formed. So let's start back there to talk about the importance of accountability when it comes to government and how that act, under subsequent reform in 2010, seeks to do just that.
I'm glad you started with that because it's very important for us to have a historical perspective. As we all know, in the past, governments would borrow money and we would take forever to hear about it sometimes. In many instances, the supplementaries would come to us long after. The business community, especially, and the social partners, business community at that time, championed by our very own Senator Godwin Hulse at the time, championed for these pieces of legislation that would enable the people to know whenever the government was going to put us into debt for more than $10 million. So thus the Finance and Audit Reform Act of 2005. We all remember all the things that the social partners had to do to champion for these and other reforms that were brought into place as a result of this. We had a special committee set up, I don't recall the name of it at the time, to bring about reforms, and the previous government put a lot of these reforms into place, and this being perhaps one of the most important ones because it gave the Belizean public that security in knowing when our governments borrowed on our behalf. It's important to put it in the backdrop as well that we still have, or there is still a lack of a formal debt management strategy. And this is being shown clearly by the European Commission's report that was commissioned with the government of Belize back in 2008 and again in 2014, where we continue to get very poor grades in the management and especially in the transparency of how we govern on our public affairs.
Let me just ask a quick question, because one of the things when the Act goes back to 2005 and then the reform came in 2010, there was no penalty per se, except you're asking people now to wait until they go to the polls to basically say whether they approved of the measures that you put in place and whether you were accountable and transparent.
Well, that's still a major issue, you know, and what's important here, when this government came to power, they came on a slate of changing the way things had been done. And they started off by making some very important changes to the law. They actually made changes to the Constitution, recognizing when they were in a position that there were weaknesses in the system, especially systems of oversight. One of the first things they did when they came to power was they empowered the Senate. They said, we recognize that there is very little oversight in the management of our public funds. They passed they made constitutional changes that promised us a 13th senator, which in their view, and we agree, would have taken away the supermajority that government enjoys in the Senate and perhaps would make the Senate more effective and less of a rubber stamp. Thank you. So we had high hopes. We had high hopes that, you know, having the 13th senator, giving the Senate oversight powers would have brought about some better openness and more accountability in the spending of our public funds. But this government went further. They passed a law in 2010, SI 95 of 2010, that specifically spoke to what it is that they intended to do. And it said that they were going to be totally transparent and publish policy and accounts of the government, and that they were going to be especially mindful of the impact it would have, or any debt would have, on this generation and future generations. So they were going to be planning long term. To date, to be honest with you, most of the promises under that SI 95 of 2010, we've not seen most of the reports and most of the spirit of that.
Now, I think because, as you alluded to earlier, the essence of which the act was brought about in 2005 is critical for people to understand, because oftentimes we don't look at what has taken place and understand it in context. There was a demand, an outright demand by social partners, by civil society, and by the general public and unions that there needed to be some form of transparency in place when it came to public funds.
I'm going to use this. You were talking about seasons and change just now. We were coming from what we thought was a dark period into a period of light, right? And we would have expected that the seasons would have followed, but we got right back into darkness. That's what has happened. This step took us back into absolute darkness. And I'd like to go through, I mean, we need to go through the bill.
And that's what I want to get at, because I had conversations with several people over the Easter break about this very same bill. And it seems that the understanding as to what the implications are isn't something that people have been able to grasp. It is understood that there is the PetroCaribe funds that rule it, because of all the political gimmicks that have taken place. But in terms of what it means to the individual citizens in this country, taxpayers, both the private sector and, of course, any person who contributes towards the public funds, then it doesn't seem to be clear.
Well, I'm glad you raised that point, and we continue to stress it, and we raised it the last time we sat here, Marilyn, is that people have to realize that this is a burden we will all have to pay. Why is the private sector so disturbed by the lack of our strategy in handling debt and knowing what our limitations are? Is that eventually this affects, our competitiveness as a country, and the private sector needs to be unsaddled with these heavy burdens of taxation for us to be truly competitive. So it's critical, and of course, for the common folk, I mean, we need to see some light at the end of the tunnel. We want to know that this season is going to change, but we don't have a plan. We're not planning for that day, how we're going to handle our debt. But let me get into the meat of this, because we know time flies on this show.
Yeah.
If you look at the the first PetroCaribe loan that came to us was in November of 2014. And it came to us in a bundle of $420 million, if I recall correctly. And when we first saw this loan motion, we immediately said that it was illegal. It was sold to us, oh, well, this is not borrowing, it's not a loan, this is supplier's credit. That was the explanation given to us. And of course, the motion carried. At that same Senate sitting, I presented a motion that gave government the opportunity to come to the Belizean people, because they claim that all the details of the spending of this money has to be presented to Venezuela anyhow. And I thought, well, why not present it to the Belizean people? So I passed a motion in that regard, where they would have the opportunity to come and explain their policies to the Senate and explain where they have spent and how much they have spent. That motion was rejected. Of course, the ayes had it, and it never came to fruition. But let's look at the present PetroCaribe bill before us. If you look at the preamble to this agreement, sections A through E, they speak of basically the cooperation agreement between Venezuela and Belize, and that they would supply 4,000 barrels of crude or refined fuel or LPG. There are 8 companies involved in this agreement, and I'll say to date, we continue to call, we continue to be promised this agreement, and we've never seen it. So what I'm going by here is I'm going by what we've learned in the Honorable House, and I expect that one would expect that what is told to us in that Honorable House would be the truth. But anyhow, so the government of Venezuela set up a company called PDVSA, and the government of Belize set up a company called Belize Petroleum and Energy Limited. And then both these companies came together to form ALBA Petrocaribe. ALBA then receives the fuel from Venezuela and then sells it to the major wholesalers and retailers in Belize, who then pay ALBA for this fuel that has come. ALBA then needs to pay the government of Venezuela approximately 50% within 90 days, and then the remaining 50% is then loaned to the government of Belize. So if we go on, in Section 8, there is a claim, and the bill says it says, it cannot be ascertained beforehand the finance portion that would be lent by APVL to the government of Belize. Well, we have difficulty with that section because who orders goods not knowing the cost? When you place an order for something, you should already know what the cost is from the minute you order it. Nobody orders goods without knowing the cost. Or are we ordering goods without knowing the cost because we don't care what the cost is? Because we're just desperate to get that 50%? You know, it's not logical that you wouldn't know.
Can I ask a quick question here? Because one of the things is, even in the way the bill was passed through the House in such haste, people continue to say, is it a case of just haste, kind of making waste kind of thing, that it's just oversight, that, listen, this thing is rolling, as they put it, and we can't quantify it, and therefore, let's just roll with the punches, and whatever happens, we'll fix it afterwards?
Well, Section I speaks to that. It says that the government wants to be expedient, okay? And that these are special provisions they're making to give effect to the cooperation agreement. Again, an agreement which we haven't seen. But to me, this looks less like expediency and more like urgency. And one begins to wonder why $10 million approximately per month is so urgent. When you have, in the face of $1 billion a year budget, $10 million per month, you know, it would be so easy for the government to have complied with this 2005 Finance and Audit Reform Act. It would have been so easy. All the government would have had to do, I'll give you 2 scenarios. All the government would have had to do was to have ALBA hold these funds. ALBA is a registered business in Belize. ALBA can hold funds. ALBA could, after it collects from the wholesalers and retailers for the fuel that it has sold to them, ALBA could hold this money, and government could come to Parliament whenever it needs the money. Every 2 months, every 3 months, every 4 months, whenever government needs it. Let's say they would have waited 2 or 3 months or 4 months in the first instance before they drew down the first amount. While they're spending that, ALBA is already accumulating and saving and holding the other monies from the other sales, from the subsequent month sales. So they would have just had to wait 2 or 3 months in the first instance, and they could have come to Parliament every quarter, you know, or 4 times a year, whenever, because they have the ability to call a session of Parliament, you know, or a meeting of Parliament whenever they want. Okay. So it appears that for desperation of getting a hold of this on a monthly basis or whenever, you know, that they choose to totally put us in the dark as to how, you know, these funds would be used. But what is, to me, what the real effect of this law, or what the real purpose of this law is, really, is that they sought to make legal now
What actions they take.
what was not legal then.
And
Right?
let's jump in there, because that has been one of the issues surrounding PetroCaribe since before election time, when we saw Honorable Julius Espat go to the courts saying that the actions taken by the administration in terms of utilizing the funds without permission from the House was illegal. In your view, Senator, is this bill an act to correct that issue?
We believe so. We believe so. Look, as a matter of fact, the bill is clear. The bill is saying basically that we will go back to 2012 and make everything that we have done in reference to ALBA and borrowing money from ALBA now legal. It's very clear. It goes retrospectively back to 2012. Why is there a need to pass a law to say that it is legal to borrow money from ALBA
Since 2012.
since 2012 if they claim it was already legal? So obviously they have confirmed, again, and especially by this law, and it was said already by them in previous House settings that they were seeking to correct what was wrong or something like that. So it's obvious that the law speaks to that. It's saying, look, we're going to make it legal, all these monies that we've borrowed back to 2012. But this bill as well goes beyond that. It's now circumventing any of the reporting requirements to Parliament. And that is of major concern. Going back to 2005, remember, that is what we fought for, right? And here we have a government that promised, accountability, transparency, etc., etc., etc. So the effect will be of absolutely removing from public scrutiny the amount of money that we're borrowing, the amount of money that we're spending, and perhaps even the accounting of the money, because we know, in the absence of an active Public Accounts Committee and an active Senate that gives us the oversight that we need in our democracy, we know that sometimes it takes years before we see the reports of the Auditor General. For example, right now, we've just taken a look at the accounts for 2011-2012, where again the government of Belize receives poor reports on the handling of public monies. So when next perhaps we look at this ALBA PetroCaribe roll-it money to see how it was spent, it may be 3-4 years down the
that
road.
was a question I had in terms of, is there anything in place in the bill that allows for accountability as to how this money will be used? Because the first step is that you can access it without going to the House. But the second part is also how the money will be spent.
Listen to what this law says. This law says that there shall be no limitations, okay? No limitation shall, okay? Not may, shall. You know what shall mean? None. No limitations shall apply to the use of borrowed money. This is the very thing they complained about from the last administration. They claimed that the last administration received monies from Venezuela and used it for what they wanted. They're passing a law that will make it legal now. In other words, they can use this money for any purpose that they want. So not only are they seeking now by this law to validate and confirm retrospectively that the first loan and the second loan, the first loan was 114 million US and the second loan was 28 million US. That those are legal now, okay? But they're saying we can spend it anywhere we want. As a matter of fact, we can hold it anywhere we want. That's what the law is saying. The law is saying that they may keep it in the central bank. It doesn't say they have to. Okay? Why didn't they say the government shall keep it in the central bank says may. So, and why did they say that the government shall have no limitations? I said the government may. The government shall. You know, what this does, it basically, you know, it totally circumvents the role of Parliament. Remember, we vote parliamentarians, and we expect them to go into this honorable House to debate on how our monies will be spent, what policies we will be governed by.
Let me just ask a question, because first you have the issue of the way the bill was taken to the House. Without committees set up, there was no
much prior notice.
Right. There was no robust debate about it, the merits or the demerits of this kind of bill. Did you have a problem with that in itself?
We always have a problem when you rush through bills in one day. You know, we can understand if there's a national urgency, right? If we're in a time of crisis, or you know, something major comes up that you don't have the luxury of time. But this thing has been in the making since 2012. They could have corrected it in 2012. They could have corrected it the whole of 2013, whole of 2014. You know, if they wanted to really be transparent and accountable, there was so many ways for them to have done this. But quite honestly, we see this trend that this government continues to ignore and suppress any attempts for explanations or for detail on its spending and spending policies.
No.
Let me continue before I lose this thought. We are told that the details for these spendings are available, you know, because it is claimed that they have to give it to Venezuela anyhow. And we keep crying for these details in the Senate. Because if you have these details that you need to present to Venezuela, why can't you present it to us, the Belizean people? Or those of us that were elected to serve the Belizean people? That to us just plain doesn't make sense. Coming from a government that has promised to be transparent and open. Right? Again, if you don't have anything to hide, then tell us what your policies are. Clearly state them. Right? And show us the details of where you spend. You know, we keep being told that we are provided with the details, and we're absolutely not. And I want to give you an example of what they classify as details. And I want to give you, and I said,
30 million for National Bank.
I can't be crazy. I look up the definition of details, you know, because I want to see if I'm seeing the same thing that they're seeing. And the definition of details, it says, with all the particulars explained, the small parts of something. That's not detail, okay? That is detail. I look up on the kids.net and find a definition on kids.net. Make it simple. It says extended treatment of particulars. So we want all the particulars. Now, let us look at the details that we've been presented.
Have been provided.
Right. Infrastructure projects, $3.5 million. That the details? Right? They go on. Southern Highway counterpart, $4.5 million. Okay. Where are the details of how much you're going to spend on the Southern Highway? Make we see it.
And with whom, right?
And with whom? Look, we just spent $6 million, I believe, on a demonstration corridor from Belmopan to Belize. We're going to light the highway, we're going to line it, reflectors, etc. Much improvement has been done, I say. But look at how many of the eyes are missing already. You know, we have dotted lines around curves in this country when the lines should be solid, right between, as a matter of fact, these things pass right in front of the Honorable Godwin Hulse's home. You don't kill somebody on that road, you know. You don't have dotted lines around a curve. The lines around a curve should be solid, right? So it's important for us to see the details so that we could hold these people accountable. If you signed a contract for this demonstration corridor and spent $6 million, you'd expect the catais to last a year. I don't know what the maintenance period is. You'd expect that the specifications would say all curves will have one solid line. which is internationally accepted standard for lines on the road, right? Why did they put dotted lines around the curve? Was it to save money? Was it that we didn't specify what it is that we were expecting from them? Yet, on many of the other curves, farther down the highway, there's solid lines, double lines, you know? So that's why it's important for us to have the details. Just an example, just a brief example. But if, you know, if you go on, you know, infrastructure projects, streets concreting, $11.7 million. Where? What streets? How many miles of streets? Name the streets that you're going to do. You understand me? Have some will, some desire to give us something that we could hold you accountable for, man.
Now, I want to go back to something that you said very early on, because when you spoke about this government putting into law certain things that really spoke to what people were upset with dating back to 2005, but not really enacting it. It's almost as if though it was a manifesto promise.
It was?
It was? Manifesto promise that was reflected in law but never enacted. So what can people do? Because given the fact that the Petro-Carib bill has passed, all the clamoring and all the debate gives people a sense that, listen, we can be upset about this, we can do and we can say whatever we want, but at the end of the day, the government will have its way.
Unfortunately, that's the system we have. But let me say this very soberly, seriously. We have to look at the past. We have to look at history to see what has happened in countries where we have had this huge division. We've had huge spending by governments, and where that spending effectively does not fall down to the people at the bottom or is not sustainable. Where am I going with this? If you're going to have unprecedented spending, you'd want to see, beside just the upliftment of infrastructure, you'd want to see, hopefully, some sustainable growth in some numbers, in these damn statistics that we keep talking about. One number, for example, is how much of our people have come out of poverty. Those are the numbers you'd like to see. There's a claim that we've created 5,000 jobs in the last year.
I was just going to point out that an indicator that is used by government is the decrease in unemployment.
Well, yes. We look, anytime money is spent, obviously it's going to have an impact. It's going to have some impact. But we say that when you spend money, it needs to be part of a bigger plan. It just doesn't need to be spent because you have it. You understand me? I wonder how much of those 4,600 and odd jobs that were created last year are permanent jobs. One of the things that we said in the House debate is, and one of the things that the European Commission report state is that while we continue to spend on big infrastructural projects, we have very little money in our budgets for the maintenance of these works. So, wouldn't it be more efficient for us to create employment through the maintenance of the roads? Wouldn't that be more sustainable? Right? Wouldn't it be more sustainable for us to employ these very same people maintaining our public buildings and our public assets? That's what we mean by creating sustainable employment. Right? Instead of waiting for the road to totally break, totally deteriorate, where you have to come in. I use the example in the Senate of Niels Penn Road. That road was recently rebuilt. Last year, I think it was totally rebuilt. Beautiful, paved. Today you go and I challenge you, take your cameras, drive on Niels Penn Road and see how many holes are on that road. Now these little holes started from small. We could have had people employed full-time going around patching these holes as they're formed and when they're small. Not wait until the road has totally deteriorated that you totally have to rebuild it. That's just creating sustainable employment, because you know the maintenance of public assets is something that will happen forever. You have to always maintain your house. You have to always they repair things and fix things. That's sustainable employment. Just one example, of course, right? So these are the types of jobs we would like to see being created. Not today to build a street, and then when the street don't build, what happened to these people? You understand me? No, man. So we have to start to plan. We have to start to think. We have to start to maximize the use of our scarce public resources, because at the end of the day, we're all going to pay for it, and it's going to affect our competitiveness as a country as well if the business community continues to be saddled by heavy tax burdens. You know, in a lot of the countries, to be competitive, the private sector is either subsidized or given special tax arrangements, you know, or they have a light tax burden. We're not asking to be subsidized. We're saying just manage our tax dollars efficiently so that we can have a lighter tax burden and be more competitive. That's all we're asking.
Can I ask you to tie in two things that we have discussed? Well, one we haven't discussed. The last time you were here and we were speaking about the budget, we noted that at the budget presentation, it was stated that a supplementary budget we would have one by the end of the year. How does the Petro-Carib bill fit in with that? One. And two, we're also, and I think people are very cognizant of the fact, we're about to enter another election cycle as well. And we don't have proper measures in place to know where the money for campaigns are coming from. So let's put that into perspective.
Well, first let me say that effectively we have very little oversight. This PIFA report done by the European Commission clearly again, and now we decide. We've had the Auditor General that said it. We're seeing it in this PIFA report from the European Commission, that the tool that Parliament has, see, we pay taxes. Parliament decides how it's going to be spent. The executive then, you know, delivers on that mandate from Parliament. So the mechanism that Parliament has to check the executive is the Public Accounts Committee. In the absence of a Public Accounts Committee active, which, by the way, this government knew was not functioning, thus it gave all these powers to the Senate, and thus it promised the 13th senator. But back to your question, none. Absolutely none. And if we see it, we'll see it 4 or 5 or 6 years down the road when we see the Auditor General's report. Right?
When it's too late.
You know, this government, when it came to power, said that it was going to even hold accountable people for the multitude of wrongdoings that had been done in spending public funds. Nobody has gone to jail. Nobody has been charged. Not one accounting officer has had a charge come on them, because really the accounting officers disperse on behalf of the executive. Ministers not do it. The people in the public service are responsible, and they're the custodians of the fund, really.
We're raising some very good points. Should people be concerned, and what can be done at this juncture?
Should people be concerned? Yes. If you give me any amount of money from your pocket, any amount, and you expect me to do certain things on your behalf, certainly I have a responsibility to come back to you and show you receipts and show you where I've spent it and tell you why I've spent it in the way I've spent it. What can we do? We live in a democracy. History has shown us that other countries have decided to go other ways. Through protests, we've seen that in the past. Through disrupting we're not promoting that, absolutely. That's why we tried on forums like this to educate people, man. Because we have to begin holding our representatives accountable. And I'll go further there. I'm trying to dance around a direct answer because I don't have one. Personally, you know what I would like to see? And I don't know if it's even possible. But certainly you'd want to see some legal way for us to hold those promises that were made to us in campaign mode, legal, if if that, you know, because you give them your vote, you give them your trust. You trust them and say, yes, boy, you tell me and do this when you get in, I believe you. But how many times have we been disappointed in our democracies? How many times?
But is there a is there a something built in within the system when a bill is being passed and they say all those in favor say aye, as opposed to having, like in the Senate, or where people can actually declare where they stand? Most of the time, elected officials don't.
We have.
So you can't go back to your area representative and say, you know, you voted
well, that's
blah, blah,
of
blah,
how
blah. It is done. The process, I'm talking about the process.
Certainly you know which side are the ayes,
Yeah.
right? And most of the time you know which side are the nays. But I imagine, I suspect that they would have the same mechanism that we have in the Senate to call for what you call a division and they record the votes. I don't know. But my point is that you know who the ayes are. You know, normally you know. As a matter of fact, when it comes to money matters, everybody on that side better say aye, which is another flaw in our democracy. Because if you don't say aye, you can be chastised and you can be kicked out, right? They have to support it. There's no debate. Really, there's no debate. There's just this totally defensive posturing, you know, and saying, well, you did so. So it's almost like because you did so, we can now do so. No, man, we expect better than that. We need better than that. William, we only have our say, it appears, right? I'm no constitutional attorney or whatever, but it appears that we only have our say when election time, and that's why it's so important for us to use that voice that we have on election day. But I think it's also important for us to tell the people in power, look, man, you know, we need to be seeing why it is that you're making these policies, and we need to see these policies implemented transparently. For example, simple examples. How do you decide what mothers get Christmas cheer? How do you decide what child gets school aid? And I know because people come to me.
Or how do you know which area deserves more assistance than others? And those,
you know, if you look at our budgets, you know, most of the budgets were busted by those ministers from Belize City. I'm not talking about the ministers in the Senate. I was proud of them. I congratulated them. All of them came within their budgets. So you're right. Some people have this ability to not follow. You know, some people have to follow. The law should be for all of us, man. You know.
Yeah, one final thing I wanted to make note of, because we're talking about this issue, and it is a very serious issue, but it has become almost a joke. Because when people talk about roll it with the Petrocarib money, people laugh. That it's just, you know, like something is happening, that Petrocarib money, roll it. Can we take this issue and turn it back into a serious issue that demands action from the general population?
You know, everybody enjoys a party. Everybody enjoys a party. Everybody feels happy when money is rolling, right? But we have to come to the realization that it's our money that's rolling, because we have to pay it back. It's going to impact us. No fool yourself. Payback day will come. These are not suppliers' credit. These are loans. The law was very clear. We're borrowing their loans. I tell people, every pound of rice, every pound of beans, everything that we consume in this country has an element of tax. So you are paying taxes. And if you're giving your money to somebody, you would expect that you should be told how it's being spent, why, and have it verified, right? I can't just take your word for it. You have to show me, okay? And I want to see the details. You want to build a house for somebody, you know, you have to give that person the receipt. You have to tell him a whole, they call it a bill of quantities. I put so much nails, so much lumber, You have to be able to prove to that person that you have done and put into it what you said you would. So citizens should have an interest because they're paying for it. The business community continues to be concerned because eventually when we're not rolling in this money, you know what the next step after this is going to be? It's going to be higher taxation. Because we have to borrow every year to pay our bills. Every year. And we've been doing it from independence every year. No, it's exploded. No, it's gotten worse. Right? The super bond now is a small part of what we owe. Right? Declared and undeclared debt, when you add it up, we could potentially owe 3.5 super bonds with the amount of money that we are in litigation over, and a huge amount of acquired land that we haven't paid for, plus many other things. I suggest you read the 2 reports I mentioned. One was this PIFA report. On the other one, there was a nice short little report that was done on proposed cost savings, government, I believe. And read the Auditor General's report for 2011-2012 that just came out. Read it. And you see, most of the issues are continuing issues, and there's been no real effort made to correct the flaws we have in the governing of public money. The business community, again, is concerned because the time will come when they'll come to us, we know it. And now come to more than 50% of the population that live in poverty. Those people are exempt from direct taxation, but they pay taxes indirectly. But they'll come to us when they can't balance the budget, when we have to start payback. So we're going to pay. We're going to pay. The Prime Minister has alluded to it, that this is not forever, that they know that the day will come when it's going to come to an end. Then what? Then what? You know?
Well, with that point, we do have to wrap up this conversation for this morning, and we want to thank you for joining us and being able to, I know you put a lot of effort into preparing for these interviews, so we appreciate all the information that you've shared with us.
Thank you so much for having us. William, welcome back. Thank you for having us, and anytime.
All right. Going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, it's the focus on World Health Day 2015.